Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Redpill, joined as always by Dr. Benway, and we are going to be discussing the retail apocalypse and other items of note insofar as this whole Black Friday, Sunday, Cyber Monday crap that I personally don't understand. But here's Dr. Benway. Dr. Benway, take it away.
Well, what prompted this, per usual, is random events during my day. This weekend I had to go into the mall to get a few knickknacks and sundries and whatnot. And this was after Black Friday, mind you. It wasn't like, it was 2 a.m. and I need to bulldoze down a part-time employee to get like an open box of a TV. No, this was just normal engagement with the Christmas shopping season, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually pay attention to the mall at these times, or I pay attention to retail in general, because I think it's a sign of a health or lack thereof in the community, potentially. And I was paying a lot of attention to my local mall because it has not really been, shall we say, in the best of times. It's generally quite empty of foot traffic, and then in some cases empty of stores. So I was kind of going in expecting it to be even worse. And I was surprised at the health of the foot traffic. I mean, it was the season for it, but it was, much healthier than I thought. And even like the stores were in a better condition than I thought they would be. And there were new stores as well. So I thought, this is kind of an anomaly. But it's been on my mind, this notion, because I think I am the type of person, I suspect a lot of people in our audience are the type of people who are a little bit more used now to shopping online, a little bit more used to not dealing with big box stores, not dealing with people where possible. And I suspect that there's potentially a loss at that. The truth of the matter is, actually, I don't know. Sometimes I have a tendency to prefer convenience, avoidance of unnecessary social interaction. And at the other end, I realize, well, it is the place where the rest of the community is kind of forced to meet each other. It is one of the linchpins of the neighborhood, if you will. In the old French, it was the arcades, and the arcades wasn't necessarily just video games. I mean, this is kind of turn of the 20th century, late 19th century, kind of glass and covered streets, glass and iron and covered streets that served as like the focal point of everybody kind of interacting with each other. And it wasn't just a little outlet of a major store. It was, the guy who cobbled shoes was there, and the woman who baked bread was there. You had to interact with them. And, that's kind of like what's been on my mind these days, to try to convert shopping into a sociological question.
Yeah, for me, it's very interesting because the whole shopping apocalypse, retail apocalypse, well, that's been going on for the last 7-8 years, right? It even has its own listing on Wikipedia. So it's an actual event where basically the online shopping experience forced so many big box retailers to bankruptcy. Now, I grew up with the advent of the mall. I remember as a small boy that the mall was sort of like, oh, this is interesting. This is like the 70s I'm talking about, right? And by the time I was a teenager, the mall was an established thing. It was the place where everybody met and all the rest of it. And people were lamenting the fact that the old Main Street had died out. Because before, you'd had a main street with all the stores there. Your main street was your open-aired mall, right? But I remember this journalist, if you don't recall, Charles Kuralt of CBS News. He did a documentary around '82, and it was right around the time I remember at least seeing Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which I believe had come out a bit earlier, but it doesn't matter. And this documentary was about Oak Park Mall, which had been the home to actually the first mall, but it had been open aired. And then he was talking about the new mall, which was closed, which is just this boring, ugly box, because the original shopping malls that had been opened, in the 50s had been like these, like you said, like Parisian arcades, like very great architecture and very beautiful, a lot of money spent on decoration. And then, they just realized that they could go all Le Corbusier and just be as minimal as possible and save money because nobody really cared. Nobody really cared about the decoration and the architecture. And I remember growing up, they were lamenting the fact that Main Street was gone and it was replaced by this boring, dull box of a mall. And now the mall is gone. It's just bizarre. I find it funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's more than just the mall itself. The mall's the last iteration that went. But even just the sheer, like, there are places, a collective area where everybody's going to go and not even just buy what they need, but interact with other people in a kind of prolonged kind of way. And even if you're a younger kid, it's probably one of your first jobs
Yeah.
you're going to get is some stupid either cashier,
McDonald's, yeah.
stocking something, serving food. It doesn't matter. I mean, and there's an it's funny for every film like Dawn of the Dead, which is a satire of mall culture. I mean, that's why zombies at the mall. It is trying to make a comment on there. But for every one of those, you have at least a half dozen of other movies that come later that try to depict mall culture as such. Obviously, Fast Times at Ridgemont High is one. Mallrats is obviously another.
Yeah.
I don't know how many '80s movies there are. Quite a few.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and the reality of the nature is that it's more than just I'm going to get what I need and you go. It is a marketplace of
Yeah.
interacting with people, and frankly, all of these are kind of iterations on other social gatherings that you would have encountered.
Yeah.
It didn't yeah. So we talked about the arcades, but even if it wasn't the arcade, you'd have like the cafe street culture, right? During the turn of the century, the fin de siècle. That was kind of where the first iteration of like online forums and cultural magazines were. What the other examples you had, like with the old, books, New York books. What was the street like where all the bookstores were?
I forget, but there was a Strand. There was a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah, the Strand. There was like Books Row or something.
Yeah.
You just literally, you're going there to get your cultural consumption, right? It was a physical location that you had to engage people with, and you didn't really, in many cases, set the terms of who you were going to engage with. You were just engaging with people there, and it's funny. Even I remember as part of mall culture, mall events, there was literally like either celebrities or people of note would show up at these fucking locations.
Yeah.
Maybe something as silly as like, oh, Mr. T is going to sign his name on a book, God, or whatever.
Well, the mall was like it became the place, the public square, but of course it was private. Now, I remember like the whole issue of the mall, financially, it was a great deal, getting into malls, for a while there in the late 70s and 80s, getting into malls was like the way to make your fortune, to become a rich man, a very rich man. Arnold Schwarzenegger invested in malls. I mean, it was like, as a business, it was like the thing. It was the private public square, and things happened in the mall. If you remember Jackie Brown, for instance, a lot of the most important scenes of Jackie Brown took place in the mall,
Right.
or the mall parking lot. And I remember everybody was like, sort of like, wringing their hands over the fact that malls centralized the shopping experience. You didn't have to go here, there, everywhere to buy what you had to do, what you needed, rather. You didn't have to walk down this long main street, and find stuff. No, it was all conveniently located in walking distance. Because do recall, a lot of times in the old Main Street or whatever, you'd have to hop in your car to go from place to place. Okay, so everybody was like lamenting the fact that the old Main Street was gone, wringing their hands about what it meant, right? But they weren't noticing what you pointed out, that the mall was a source of employment for the local youth. But how can I put it? The thing that I hated about the mall is that it sort of like it made of the suburbs like a desert, and there were these oases of people at the mall, and there was quite a bit of distance between them, and not just the big box mall, right, but also the strip mall, right. I'm thinking, like, in my own case, I remember very clearly there was this big Kmart and this open-aired strip mall. I mean, it was technically a strip mall, but it had, I don't know, it must have had like if I had to guess, maybe 50 stores, 50 small stores. It had a small bookstore. It had a small record shop, a small one, but I mean, it must have been, thinking about it, maybe each of them about, between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet of retail space. So it was like big enough, and it was like this strip thing. But over the years, I noticed that even those got wiped out and just became these big regional malls. And then all of a sudden, with online living, online existence, they just got snuffed out. And it's so shocking that it was so fast. The retail apocalypse happened between 2010 and 2017, when the online shopping experience reached a tipping point and everything became Amazon land. It's just bizarre, you know?
Well, there were a couple of phases. It even happened before that, because one of the things I always thought about the mall culture is that even if it's a singular building or collection of buildings, right, it's still a collage of different stores, right? It's like not like one company runs all the stores in the mall usually. You did, even if they were outlets of bigger name corporate entities, they were still, a collection of different shops you could get into, and small time people could still get in there. Uh, what started changing that, even before you got, online shopping, which obviously kind of was the death knell. But even the big box guys, the big box department stores like your Kmart's, like your Walmart's, what they basically did was say, why even bother going to the mall? We basically have a mall all in a big space. All the departments are the different places you could potentially go. Why bother? Oh, and by the way, it's as cheap as it can fucking be if you go to Walmart or Target or Kmart, or pick your poison, right? Yeah, occasionally a department store would be one of the anchors in the mall, notably Sears, again one of the major retail players that went to bankruptcy this year. But they didn't dominate the whole thing. Now, yes, Amazon, like Walmart before, it's, hey, why bother going to all different sites and everything? We have literally everything you could conceive of. What you do as a result of that, you eliminate any kind of human interaction, any kind of accidental kind of engagement with people as a result of that. And that is something. There's something serious about that. That I for all my desires for convenience, it always begs the question: what is the cost of convenience on the individual? I don't even necessarily mean the obvious way, the cost of convenience on, like, hey, all of these people unemployed. That's a big topic we could talk about. But the cost of you, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I think the example I always, that I don't even, this isn't even my example. I just like hearing it when people said, back in the day when if you were into a band, let's say, it may not necessarily be the easiest thing to just go on. Well, obviously you couldn't go online and get all of their records, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had to some sense hunt it down.
Yeah.
And there was a sort of developmental exercise in doing that. You had to talk to people. You had to ask people, do you know this, that, or the other? You would go around and find these things. Yes, there's an inefficiency to that, but there is a, for lack of a better term, a questing element to that. And the questing element is probably, in many cases, the mechanisms why you found peripheral things that were of importance. I'm sure you experienced this even more than I did. I got the tail end of it a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. For me, it was a bookstore. I remember in '95, I just moved to LA. I was living in a shitty little apartment, and I got this flyer in my mailbox one day saying that the Barnes and Noble was going to be opening up. Okay, and the flyer had all kinds of coupons, and I was like psyched about that. I mean, they were really astonishing. It was like 30-40% off and stuff, right? And so I went down to the Barnes and Noble that they'd opened up, and it was 4 stories of underground parking, right, and 5 stories of books, and it was just like this major store, okay, huge. And I go there, and it's like a pig in shit. I'm happy as can be. Especially at that time that I was dead broke. Going to the Barnes and Noble and being able to sit there and just read a book for free. Not have to pay anything. Right? I could even bring my own coffee if I so felt like it. If I could, just brew it at home and bring in a thermos bottle, they wouldn't have a problem with it. And I could just sit there all day if I wanted to. There were several weekends when I was so flat broke that that was my only entertainment for the weekend. And it was great. But now that I don't even know if that store is existing anymore. Barnes and Noble is like seriously on the back foot as a commercial venture. Yeah, and I think also what was nice was the other people. There would be a lot of other people, and you'd wind up talking to them sometimes. And I'm not saying, picking up some girl. Sometimes you'd be talking to some guy about some novel there and just have a delightful conversation with somebody. It was a nice experience, that interaction. Now, of course, the convenience of just click, 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 and there you have the book. But it's not the same now, is it? It's because it's not. It's just your eyes are the only senses experiencing it, but it's not like feeling the texture of the book, the smell of the store, the change of environment by having to go to the
Right.
store, the random people who some of them might know what you're talking about, interacting with the shop people. All that's gone.
Yeah, yeah, the expertise. I mean, comic book folks would have known this. Like you said, like, hey, I'm interested in this particular writer or artist, and if the shopkeeper knew, and it's like, oh yeah, you should look at this, that, or the other. You may not be aware he did this thing. Oh, and by the way, a guy's very similar to him. Look out, this guy. All of that level of engagement you got. Yes, you can get variations of that online. It's not really the same. It's like you hear the two of us talk, but it's a little bit different from if you were talking to us in person in a coffee shop, or you ask, am I expertise on things? I could literally start pulling things off the shelf and handing them to you and say, this is what you want to look at, that's what you want to look at, and this side. It's not the same
No.
online. It's a proxy for sure, but it's not the same. And it's the general imposition of bigness, that's the other bothersome element to this, right? I mean, with convenience, convenience is predicated on the notion that I can literally pull anything for you, right? And with that anything, it's like all of the little inefficiencies of life get trotted away. And yeah, there's cost to it, but hey, Amazon is this wonderful company that has everything you could possibly want. And hey, your privacy might be invaded. Your companies might be rivaled, out of business and whatnot, but it doesn't matter because you can buy everything so cheaply.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That notion of like cheapness uber alles, I think, is a terrible mistake. Because I think that competition is inevitably inefficient, and competition, inefficiency of competition gives rise to higher prices. I think that the whole turning away from competition and the regulatory framework of the United States that has favored low prices over competition, that doesn't matter if something becomes a monopoly. I think that has had really detrimental effects, because a monopoly can, yeah, deliver lower prices, but still the social cost. Because if that monopolist decides to leave or punish somebody, or do something, he can act unilaterally in a way that can be extremely destructive, and that's what's happened. But okay, that's life. I think, because, dear listener, we were talking about doing another episode, which we will be doing, which is the issue of laissez-faire as being the ultimate good. And I think that this is the problem. It depends on what value you put at the center of economics. If you put at the center of economics of the market the notion of competition, you get one thing, you get one result. But if it's low prices, you get a vastly different result. And I think that that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing this barrenness because there's just Amazon, and people just stay at home. They don't interact. They don't need to. And people are, slaves to convenience. So if they don't need to do something, they won't do that thing, even though it might be beneficial to them. You have to sort of force them. And of course, then you start going down the rabbit hole of leftist ideology of like, oh, well, then you should make them do this because it's good for them, and what's the good, and all the rest of it. So I don't even want to touch that. But I think we're in a desert, socially speaking.
well, here's the thing, and I'll throw a curveball out there that people may not have been expecting. It seems to me that it actually is not an insignificant part of the reason we are feeling so constrained by the major tech oligopolies of today. Think about it. If the major, what's the acronym where we say the
The
fangs?
fangs, yeah.
What are the fangs but a manifestation of search, shopping, and social media?
Right.
Think about why we have all those things. Well, amongst other reasons, a lot of the vehicles you would have gone, not just for shopping, yes, but as we already indicated with these retail stores, these malls, these bookstores, what have you, they would have been locations and places where you would have interacted with people to get a lot of the things you would have gotten from social media. Yes, Twitter lets you know the broader world, but before Twitter, you would have had your little zines, you would have had your clicks, you would have had your coffee shops, whatnot. Same goes for YouTube. Google is the mechanism of searching, and oftentimes the expertise you got from the people in the stores would have been that expertise that you would have got through searching. With all of that gone in a very much a desert, or even if it's not gone, it's like we don't really focus on it. You drive yourself further and further into the social media world to be that replacement proxy. And guess what? You're so dependent on them that you're now you're beholden to them. All of their, like you said, their social engineering desires. It's hard for me not to think that this has a piece of contribution to that.
Yeah. I guess what happens is it's so bloody useful. That's the problem. It's so goddamn useful to just sit there on your ass, let your ass get fatter and fatter every day, and just click, click, click. You know, like yesterday, right? I was arranging travel plans. I was purchasing some items I had to get. I was looking up some information. I was talking to a whole bunch of people. All of this from my computer, from my laptop computer, which means I can go anywhere with it, right? I'm sitting there on my laptop doing all this stuff, finding out all of this information, arranging all of these things that ordinarily, instead of taking me, you know, it was maybe a couple of hours, it would have taken me a couple of days. You know, yeah. I mean, I also had to do like some banking stuff, right? And so it was like all of these things that I was doing was just so easy. No going to the bank, no going to the library, no going to the retail store, no going to the travel agent. No. All online and incredibly convenient. I didn't interact or speak with a single person except a couple of emails from my bank. You know, it was, if you think about it, it's kind of creepy. I thought to myself at the time, boy, I got a lot done. But yeah, but at the cost, what cost, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's a problem because it is a valuable lure, right? Like, for example, I'll give you my story. Over the weekend, I wanted to pick up all of these volumes of James Boswell's personal journals.
Mm-hmm.
So Boswell is famous as the biographer, the life of Samuel Johnson. That's his claim to fame. But he's also, for those who dig into him, like his whole series of journals are much more interesting. Even I know I could never get him at 99% of the physical bookstores, right?
Yeah.
Not just because they're out of print by and large, but because they're just a specific item.
Yeah.
I go on Amazon, I got all of the volumes used cheap. They're all on their way, right? I mean, it was that convenient. So I know it's that convenient. I know there was no other way to get it. I also know that I have probably as a result sacrificed some of the value to a lot of these things. The notion of rarity of something, like putting the effort in to get something does seem like it diminishes the value of those things. I mean, when I can get a stack of books so quickly, sometimes it feels like, I'll peruse them and then, oh, I'm done. And I don't care that much. It doesn't have that weird psychological weight that of the effort you put into it.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something to that, So, I mean, but needless to say, it's not something I can just take the wand, wave away, and say, "There's nothing here." It's all empty calories, because it's not. I frankly got something of use that I would never have been able to get any other way, and that's the kind of natural conundrum we're always in. What's the proper trade-off, right?
Yeah. Because how can I put? Okay, look. Way back in the say 18th century, everything was literally bespoke. Everything was custom made. You went to one town and then you went 100 miles to another town on your horse and buggy or whatever. And it was just a completely different environment, completely different products. Nothing was standardized. Everything was all over the place. I mean, not even the time was the same from town to town. Okay. That's the reality of living in America in 1790, 1780, 1840, for instance. Same thing. It'll be just totally different. But between 1840 and 1900, everything became standardized, and we all sort of well, not all of us, none of us were alive, of course, but we, as a society, we collectively wrung our hands and say, oh, isn't this terrible? The standardization and the loss of something unique and, something whatever the fuck, right? Okay, fine. So we wrung our hands about that. And then during the 20th century, the great standardization, the great homogenization, that everything became the same. And by the end of the 20th century, you're driving down the freeway, the interstate, and you see the same McDonald's and Wendy's and Union 76s or whatever, and they're all the same everywhere you go. It's all the same. The same Bob's Big Boy is going to be in California or Wisconsin or Maine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is the same. Everything is, and if you want something obscure or out of the ordinary, boy, are you going to have to hunt for it. It's going to be goddamn hard because everything has been Californiaized. It's Californicated. It's just all the same, incredibly dull and boring. And then the online world, you can be as weird and unique as you want to, and somebody will find your stuff. Somebody will find your product, your little group, your little fetish, your little whatever it is, no matter how weird and obscure. And not only will they find it, there will be enough people worldwide that to coalesce around this thing online, that you will have a vibrant community over whatever the hell. I mean, you could be like into tiddlywinks, for crying out loud. Well, I'm not even going to get into tiddlywinks because I know that the tiddlywink club online world is like huge, right? I mean, you can get into the most obscure things and there will be a huge crowd. Now, that's a great thing about the online life, that it has brought back that variety that was standardized out of existence between, say, the 1850s and the year 2000, roughly. But by the same token, it's made us so goddamn isolated, or worse, it's made us siloed because we interact only with the people who think exactly as we do. And that's creepy. That's creepy as hell. You know what I mean?
Well, it makes things difficult, right? I mean, yes, it's very easy, like you said, to gather the furries together and jerk off together, right? I mean, that becomes easy. What's harder? Breaking out of that. By that, I mean, you can easily, and I think, the notion of the echo chamber, while a cliche, is very real. It's very easy to think in this world that nothing else could possibly be worth your time, right? Beyond your whatever your fetishistic interest. I use that term loosely. Well, as I said, when you are in these physical spaces, if you have to go out into the physical world to get something of what you need, right? You are invariably going to have to encounter people who don't think or operate or want the things you do. And even if it could even be benign, right? There's just people who are tangentially interested in what you want, but they're doing 90% other things. That interaction is in part how you grow, right? The accidental interaction with the tangential or the completely out of left field has its value. I know that I can really go deep down the rabbit holes of any one of my interests and never leave it. If all I wanted to do was, for example, think about obscure Catholic theology.
Mm-hmm.
I could be in a world where I never have to escape it, and I don't even have to be in the fucking monastery to do that anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
well,
I don't know. Like
it's great that you can do that. Okay. I mean, look, it's like everything. There are trade-off costs. It's wonderful that you're able to indulge whatever thing that you really, really like and find very easily the people who are equally enamored of that thing, like conservative Catholic theology, for instance. Let's not talk about furries because I don't want to talk about that group right now because it's kind of horrifying. But you can find any obscure group, no matter how bizarre, and you can hook up with people, like-minded people, and that is a wonderful thing. But you don't, at the cost that you don't talk to the guy next door. You have no idea what's going on in your locality. You're just a free-floating atom, like an untethered balloon, to use my favorite metaphor. It's creepy, and it's
very fragile too.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, because a little bump to this online existence, and it can be completely shattered, and all of a sudden, all of your social capital, the social capital you have accumulated with these like-minded people, if the rug gets pulled out from under you, i.e., you get deplatformed, it's not merely that perhaps your business or your entertainment is gone. It's like your whole social set is gone, and that's catastrophic, I would think.
And not only that, it's you become like these random, they happen in nature. Like there are certain fish who can only survive at a certain pH level
Mm-hmm.
in the water.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a little bit too high, they'll die. If it's a little bit too low, they'll die. Similarly, in an isolated world like this, it's like, oh, if it's a little bit too far off to the right, fuck, I can't operate, I can't think, I need to go back to the safety of my Vatican II Council documents. I'm just saying that because I'm looking at this book.
Yeah.
but you get my point,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it not only is the society or the little niche society you're in itself, can be pulled out from under you, broken, whatever. Your ability to find a replacement or your comfort level with a replacement could also just be so unnecessarily jarring.
Mm. Yeah, I'm very much of two minds about this whole situation now, because I can see the advantages of the new situation. If there weren't advantages, nobody would be doing it. Okay, obviously.
Right.
So there are tremendous advantages to it. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the cost. But by the same token, I get sort of like impatient to be wringing my hands over the inevitable costs of something that is positive in many ways. I get bored of that, because that's something that we conservatives tend to do a little bit too much, wringing our hands about, the this newfangled thing, this electricity stuff. I don't like it. I like it when we just wax candles and shit, and we should go back to wax candles. We conservatives tend to have this hand wringing thing. But by the same token, we also tend to be the ones like having the best critiques of the new, and not being enamored of the new merely because it is new or merely because it is very convenient. Because it is so goddamn convenient. Okay, I mean, like, for instance, let me tell you about the banking situation I had. Somebody tried to charge a few $100s on one of my credit cards. Okay, and the bank alerted me via email. And I had a series of exchanges via email, and the net result is that that card got canceled, and they'll just FedEx me a new one. Now, all of this happened without a shred of conversation. It happened in the course of a couple of hours. It was just done. No, nothing drawn out. Had it been like the real world, it would have taken days. It would have been something that would have been weighing on my mind for days, because I'd be thinking, even though I know for a fact that my insurance policy on my credit card is such that I'm not going to pay a dime of any of these losses. That's the point of having it, right? I'd still be, since if it were stretched out over days, I'd be thinking about it, worrying about it, and but as it is now, I don't have to worry about it. It's just going to be paid off, fixed, done. It was done in, it couldn't have been more than 90 minutes. The whole interaction to solve this problem. So convenient. It was just so it allowed me to relax, to not have this floating in the back of my mind over the next couple of days. I got the notice, swapped some emails with the fraud people at the bank, done, and that was it. It was just so smooth, right? But more importantly, it reduced the anxiety and worry, even though in this particular case, nothing was going to happen to me, even if it had been drawn out. But it's just the fact that it would have been sitting in the back of my head for 2-3 days or longer. I mean, like, I can imagine, like, I remember actually now thinking about this back in like the 80s. I think my parents got like some sort of credit card fraud, and it was an issue for them for a couple of weeks, or at least I remember it as it having been a problem for them for a couple of weeks. And how can I put that? Think about it. Think about the back in the 80s, they were worrying about something for a couple of weeks that for me was solved in 90 minutes. That is
for sure. I mean, there's absolute convenience to that, for sure. Like banking is a great example. All sorts of basic utilities you'd have to deal with.
Yeah.
No doubt. Though there is admittedly something materially different when it's something that was never like of an urgent matter to begin with, but does affect you above and beyond that. So obviously, like I had mentioned, the clothing you get, the books you buy, the culture you consume, right? It's not as if any of these things were things that have to be urgently addressed right away. In fact, the more time spent on them actually generally is not a bad thing, right?
Hmm.
You'd love to spend more time on that. So that is kind of like the zone I'm mostly worried. Not even well, worried about is a strong word, but I notice details, and you're right. Conservatives tend to hand wring all the time. It's part of the nature, right? But that hand wringing also puts you in a position to notice continuity and change in a way that those who are always just looking for the new never notice. Because when you're always looking for the new, your memory is short term, always, right? You're always like, what is happening now? What is happening now?
Yeah.
It's like the mayfly, right? So a conservative just sees by his nature, these changes. And like you said, sometimes the changes are beneficial. Other times you're like, I notice what's happening, what the cost is. But like you, I'm like, I don't know ultimately what to do about it. I don't know what ultimately is the best thing. I just, I can know and do know that there are significant costs to it that are, with every benefit, they're affecting us negatively one way, another way, like I said.
Well, yeah, they
You're
are.
kind of isolated.
Yeah, okay. The negatives of being isolated are the thing, and so the issue becomes, okay, we obviously don't want to get rid of the positives of this experience because it's the convenience and speed and agility of everything. It's just better, and the availability of things that formerly were obscure or hard to come by. Yeah, like as I'm speaking to you now, I'm sitting on this stool, an uplift stool. I highly recommend it. This is obviously not a paid endorsement of any sort. The uplift stool is this obscure little company, Uplift, that creates these tables that raise up your stuff. And I'm sitting on the stool that they invented that is just wonderful because it sort of like rocks around. It's just great. But anyway, the point is, see, we don't want to eliminate the convenience of being able to find something as obscure as my rockable stool, right? We want to keep that, but at the same time we want to alleviate some of the bad that is the inevitable cost of this progress. Now, what has been the cost of the retail apocalypse? Because what it really means is the ascendancy of the online shopping experience, which we all agree is just better. I mean, the idea of just shopping for stuff and it just arrives at your door the very next day, sometimes on the very same day, and you just get your stuff, and if you don't like something, you just put it back in the box, seal it up, and return to sender, and that's that, and it gets solved for you magically. This is all wonderful. But the cost is we don't see other people. So how do we fix it? How do we make people go and see each other?
Well, I'll throw in a wrinkle here. I know how we sometimes get around this in very ridiculous fake ways. For example, I know the big rhetoric, especially that started up during the 90s. It was your generation that was really big on this. The whole idea of authenticity was really kind of like a big rhetoric around that time. It was the idea like, oh, all these big box store, these big corporate interests, we don't want that. We want something more authentic and local and whatnot. In theory, it tries to scratch a very similar itch,
Yeah.
right? If not the same itch. What you wind up getting, and is what you notice now, which is the
Fake.
false,
Yeah.
the false authenticity, all this artisanal shit, like, oh, this place has artisanal sandwiches, or
Yeah.
oh, like, we have, like a small kind of cool corporate vibe in our culture. It's still basically a weird corporation taking the gloss of your notion of authenticity, wearing it like a little
Like a cheap suit.
smock
Yeah.
or a cheap suit, and basically selling you, the same crap. Like, I'll give you like an example. I always love to say it, for those who, like going out to restaurants in America. A lot of these restaurants you think of, oh, it's I like this one restaurant. It's like from this owned by this particular guy or that particular guy. The reality is, a lot of those restaurants are owned by a chain that
Yeah.
you would just never know. It's
Yeah.
like a let us entertain you restaurants, for example, is a very big corporate brand. They have innumerable number of restaurants.
Yeah.
to their brand. It's basically just McDonald's with a lot of very
Yeah. Bells and
uniquely
whistles.
marketed
Yeah.
chains, right?
Yeah.
Or franchises, I should say. That is the other kind of rub you have to deal with. Like,
Yeah.
and this is the nature of
No,
capitalism. It can absorb your critiques faster than you could realize what's going on.
yeah, because like for instance, like TGI Fridays, right? I remember in 81, 82 that there was a TGI Fridays at this very upscale mall. Okay, keep in mind this was 81, 82, almost 40 years ago. And TGI Fridays, it was in this upscale mall and it was an expensive restaurant. And we thought that it was unique. You know how naive now, right? But at the time, we'd never seen anything like it, and we saw it was decorated with all these knickknacks. Okay, now, dude, keep in mind in 81, 82, since there wasn't a market for these knickknacks, they were genuine knickknacks. Okay, it wasn't like later when all the knickknacks were like fake. No. This was like
Right.
the real knickknacks. They were true knickknacks, right? And it just seems such an authentic experience. And of course, it was a corporation. It was a corporate restaurant back in 81, 82. And it had a number of outlets. And now we all recognize TGI Fridays is as fake as a $3 bill. But at the time, it seemed unique. It seemed local. It seemed like an actual restaurant that, oh, this is so funny that this, how they're decorating it with all these old things, right? And we commented on the fact that it felt so cozy, not like some other cheap and cheerful kind of place like McDonald's or something like that, right? And because of the decor, it was more expensive. I don't know when they switched their strategy to make it cheaper, but more all you can eat kind of vibe, right? But at the time, it was an expensive restaurant at an upscale mall, and everything seemed very bespoke. It seemed unique. And so even then, they were like the capitalism was outpacing its critics. That's pretty goddamn funny if you think about it.
Oh yeah. It's another manifestation of, like I said, the Che Guevara T-shirts.
Yeah,
Honestly, like everything you would do to say like there's a problem here. Oh, well, we'll fix it, and it just superficially addresses the the outward signs of what you have a concern of here. So yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, let me kind of tie this into the broader picture of what we always talk about, right? If if we had mentioned as part of our political goals, right, are trying to have some manifestation of local community engagement, right? Well, it's one thing to say, oh, we should all be part of like the the village board, right?
right.
We all go to the town meetings and say, oh, this, that, or the other. I know that people would get tired of that quickly, but there's always all the other little pieces of social engagement that, when taken together like a mosaic, build up the society, right? Part of that is how you purchase and engage, how your shopping experience, as silly as that sound, is part of it, right? Yes, as much as your political engagement, as much as going to visit the library, as much as bringing a fucking casserole to your neighbor's house when you hear the kid is sick, right?
Do
All
people
of that
do
is
that? Sorry.
well, in some of the suburbs, people would still do that. I haven't gotten a casserole in a long time. And I've been waiting for it. God damn it.
Yeah.
But you get the idea,
Yeah.
right? All of those pieces are part of it, right? And and we could go down the list of all of those pieces that are gone, and for each piece, you could tell a compelling story why it makes sense that it's gone. We don't have time to pay attention to the local village board. It's like, oh, I'll just like let the old timers vote. It entertains them. It doesn't bother me one bit or the other. I'll just focus once a year, right?
Yeah.
Good story. Retail, we already detailed, like, it's just so convenient. The stores look like shit a lot of times. I don't like the neighborhood, whatever, neighbors, like go down the list, like, this, that. What you were left with in a lot of instances are just a series of bedroom communities.
Yeah.
And, for those of you who know that, there are certain types, there are like small town suburbs, which kind of like have everything you would need to live there. And then there are those exurbs or bedroom communities, which are literally like subdivisions that are just homes.
Yeah.
You just go there to sleep, and everything you need is either you have to drive a while to like the local super chain or the whatever. There's no community there other than just like you may acknowledge the fact that your neighbors exist,
Yeah.
but that's about it.
Yeah.
All of that builds up, and you're in cells essentially. You're in nice little coterie, protected, sealed off cells. And if you think you're living in the city is somehow going to improve that, yeah, you have in theory more access to more things, but more and more of the neighborhoods I see are turning into cells.
Mm.
Yes, you're going to have your little street of restaurants or whatnot, but it's all the same kind of chain restaurants too.
Yeah. The issue of what did the Greeks call it? The civic life? No, no, it was the market life. Just the
Hmm.
interaction with your community, quote unquote. Uh, it's just very dispiriting. Okay, so this conversation started off because of the whole retail apocalypse, and frankly, it was talking. We just started off this conversation because we were thinking about the Black Friday retail day, which
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
which in the real world it was sort of like flat year over year. Online, it was quite a bit greater. It was like 6-7%, I believe, was the figure that sales had grown by 6 or 7% year over year online, and that in the retail in the real world, brick and mortar, it was flatlined after the catastrophe of the last 7-8 years. So it seems as if basically the retail apocalypse has ended because there's nobody else to die. I mean, the ones that are left standing. And let me ask you something, because I don't live in the States, and I haven't lived in the States since 2006. Let me phrase it. I haven't been to the US in quite a number of years. So what's the scene? I mean, is it just like just a wasteland of empty strip malls and empty malls and such?
Well, it depends. There are a couple of malls near me. One mall I went to not long ago, which is actually the major, the more sizable mall. It was like a ghost town in there. Yes, there were shops there, but very little foot traffic. There was some empty slots.
Yeah.
So that was notable. It feels like it's dying. This last mall visit I made this past weekend was a bit of a shock because it felt more vibrant for the variety of reasons I mentioned. When I a lot of like if you actually are going to go to a physical store to shop for things, I think the only stores that still have to be vibrant just given their nature are grocery stores,
Yeah.
simply because
You have to go. Yeah.
most people want to actually touch the produce that they're buying.
Mhm.
That there are efforts to change that.
Yes.
I see every day now.
Hmm.
Even my local grocery store, like literally like the local chain of grocery stores, is now trying to do the Peapod-esque response, like order online and we'll do all this for free for you and whatnot. So they're trying to move that needle, but I think that's going to be harder to move. That's like the only area where there's active engagement, right? Yeah, you still have your necessary big box stores like your Walmarts or Targets or Kmart's, what have you. But the thing I noticed going into those stores is the disregard and disorder that's in those stores. Like I needed to just get a pair of scissors, right?
Hmm.
Like kitchen scissors. You could easily get them anywhere. As I was going through the aisle that had them, there was like stuff was on the floor. The first two packages of scissors were opened and like the scissors stolen out of them. Like, are you kidding me?
Really?
Yeah, things like that.
I'm sorry, which store was this?
That one was Walmart.
Uh-huh.
Like I said, I just literally needed something very cheap, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. And yeah, so there's certainly that. Like the quality of the shopping experience by and large just seems amiss,
Hmm.
or a little bit like uncared for
Yeah.
in a lot of instances. So yeah, when you're confronted with that, you're like, oh, I'll just shop online. Even clothing, like I still do my clothing online. Like what I do now is like I will just go to the two or three stores that carry the brands that I like, just confirm my size, and will probably just order the colors and fabrics I want online. And frankly, even now, I don't even go into the store because I'm just so used to and know how my sizes are going to be.
Hmm.
Even if I don't, I'll just get like a few sizes around mine, and then I'll just return the others. So again, that's me engaging in the convenience
Well, of course,
factor
it
as
would, it
well.
would
It's
be
not above.
foolish for you not to. Yeah, if they're gonna,
Right.
the other day, 2 days ago, I had to buy new snow boots, right? Because here in Ukraine, yesterday it started snowing for the first time, and holy cow, did it snow! And it's not even December. Okay, so yeah, I'm looking forward with some trepidation to the real winter here. But anyway, I went to get some snow boots, right? And so I go to the store, and I had to try on several different boots, and it was not necessarily a hassle, but it's something that you have to do, right? And so the thought that five different pairs of boots would arrive in my house at my doorstep, and I just open up the boxes, pick the right one at my leisure, and then just ship them off. Yeah, sure, I would do that. I mean, if I could, I'd do it here, sure. Even though I think that the experience of going to the store is better. And also, what happens to me is that I sort of like prefer to do my shopping like that at the store. I personally would not feel comfortable receiving a bunch of things, because I realize what would happen is that I'm a natural procrastinator, and so I'd leave the boxes there with all the crap that I bought, and the days would slide by because I know myself, right? The days would slide by and I'd never get around to it, and then I'd be in a panic because I have to box all this shit and send it back before the expiry date or the limit date, right? And it would be just an annoyance. Whereas when I go to the store, I can get like five pairs and leave it all, like all over the place, and I know that some attendant will square it all away, and I don't have to worry about it. So that's why I prefer to go to the store. But I see the value of it. But it's just, how could I put it? The notion that there is fewer and fewer places where strangers are forced to interact, and the only interaction you have is with like-minded people. I think that
Yeah.
this is the core problem. This is the core problem of the loss of the retail space, because we used to wring our hands, like I was saying before, about the end of Main Street, the death of Main Street, and the rise of the mall. But in the mall, it was still a relatively regional thing. It was based on location, right? They were called regional shopping centers, right? And people from around that area would go to the shopping center. The public square had been privatized, roofed, and turned into this very climate controlled environment. Fine. But we were still forced to interact with other people that didn't necessarily share our points of view, that didn't necessarily share our politics or our interests or anything. But now the siloing, I think, is the problem. It's not an issue. How can I put it? I don't want to be like the fuddy duddy who's like, oh, progress bad, get off my lawn. No, it's the issue that we're becoming so isolated from one another, and so uh, um, maniacally interested in our particular little fetishes and little things of interest, and we ignore everybody else. We ignore everything else except the things that we like. I think that this is catastrophic.
And it reinforces our lack of skill with engaging people. I mean, it's not an accident I brought up the disheveled nature of these stores, right?
Yeah.
Because that is a circular logic. The idea that if before like going to like a store was a big deal, like that's where people get their shopping done. It's like, I want this to look pristine and orderly as possible. The floors are going to look spotless, everything's going to be in order, there's not going to be any kind of mess, what have you. Now, I mean, when your focus is on cheapest price possible, spend as little on your employees as possible, and people are not going to want to often go to the store anyway. Who gives a shit? And then when someone goes in there if they need something, they realize, oh, this kind of sucks, I'm going to look for an excuse not to go there next time. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a skill set that's lost, that doesn't really it's not isolated to the store, right? It's not isolated to just keeping a nice store. It manifests itself elsewhere. It's like I have shorter tempers, or my temper is shorter now with people on the road. People don't know how to, when they're in a grocery store, even put their carts off to the side so someone could actually walk through. All of those skills. The idea that you to go back to a meme that people have called me out on, saying like, we live in a society, right? The idea that there are kind of rules of engagement with people, that you do so not because you're grandstanding or because it's privilege or what have you. It's just to make people interact with each other more smoothly, easier, more without
Well,
threat of
violence. Yeah, but the problem is that now with the online world, we have totally fixed the issue of people interacting with each other smoothly and without the possibility of violence. We don't have them interact at all. Problem solved.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? And that's the thing that's so frustrating, because we want people to interact, but we don't want them to interact to the point where they start killing each other, right? It's like, and we can't seem to adjust the dial to just right. Actually, I do think that at the mall it was almost just right, but it just seemed a little lifeless. And perhaps that's the issue. At the end of the day, as human beings, we cannot have a steady state. It has to be constantly fluctuating, up and down, up and down. It can never be on the money. That was the thing about Star Trek, that I always criticized it, that I didn't like it, because the society that Star Trek's characters seem to live in seemed so static. It seemed unreal to me. Okay, yeah, because they would have this. They would interact with people from different planets or whatever. Sure, they would interact with these strange beings, the Klingons, the Romulans, whatever the hell, right? But human society seems static. There was no money, and it was this weird kind of communism kind of a situation where everybody just, what was the expression that Jean-Luc Picard said, that everybody just strove towards fulfillment?
We strive to better ourselves. It's funny you should mention it's Next Generation in particular.
Mm-hmm.
The first series was very much the life on the frontier.
Yeah.
Later series, particularly Deep Space Nine, made fun of Next Generation for this in a very sharp critique if you watched it. But Next Gen was the joke people had. It was like the Enterprise was a mall in space.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody was wearing real uniforms. There was the woman sitting next to the captain of a ship that had weapons on it was a counselor. It's like, oh, tell me about your feelings.
Yeah.
There's that. There are kids on this ship. I mean, a ship that encounters aliens occasionally that want them to blow the fuck out of space. Oh, we're going to have children. We're going to have school. And we're going to have an episode where we teach tap dancing and everything. That there is something to that, right? Yeah, there was a stasis in the Gene Roddenberry. It's funny that we're going from malls to Gene Roddenberry, but there is a legitimate connection.
No, I mean, that's why I brought it up, right? That airlessness.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. No, especially that series. For everything I love about that series encapsulates, despite its supposed left-wing politics, it perfectly encapsulates like 80s, static, self-fulfillment life, and they play the game. Oh, we don't believe in money. Yeah, but it's pure consumption.
Yeah.
You have a machine that makes whatever the fuck you want. You can go and live in your little stories. Like you can be, Robin Hood or Sherlock Holmes or what have you. It's funny this will be the critique I'll make of that particular view of Star Trek. In a world where it's a world or utopia with no money, but 100% consumerism.
Yeah, exactly. No money, but 100% consumerism. It's sort of like the cashless society that they want to build in Sweden. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
But okay, so the point of that, why I brought it up, is that that society in Star Trek is static. We as human beings, we cannot live in a static society. We need change. We need constant change. And so the urge towards trying to achieve some sort of utopia is absurd, because we're never going to be happy. Because I always think of that experiment with mice and temperature. See, the researchers had these levers built into their little rat cage, right? And so they bring in these mice, and they'd set the temperature at an uncomfortable level for the mice to see how the mice would change the temperature, because the mice realized that if they tapped a little lever, they would make it hotter or colder, right? And so the researchers made it extremely hot, or relative to the mice, without killing them, of course, or very cold. Right. And the mice would go and tap it until they averaged out. Oh, okay, X degrees is like the optimum. Okay, let's just say, for the sake of argument, there was 21 degrees Celsius. I don't know. Okay, I'm just making it up. And so they set the cage at 21 degrees. And what happened was that the mice would come in and they'd instantly go and tap on the lever to just change it just a little bit. And the researchers realized that they could never nail a temperature where the mice would not go to change it, because they realized that the mice needed the sense that they were controlling their environment. They needed that sense. And they would alter their environment and move the temperature gauge out of the optimal in order to feel that they had control over the environment. And I think that that's the thing with the malls and the whole thing, that it was sort of like the rejection to the mall was happening as the malls were taking over the place, because it was just so fucking airless, temperature controlled, just everything just perfect, all the leaves bright green of the plants, and everything was just perfect, right? And airless and dull as can be, and you just wanted to get away from that fucking place, even though it was lovely. Objectively, a mall is a lovely place to be, but you got sort of sick of it. You wanted something different. But my feeling now is that with the online world, you just have this point of interaction with the online world, which is your computer or your cell phone, right? And so what happens now is that you kind of like, it can be your environment, any environment you want, and the environment you're going to have is going to be one of decay. Because like when you had to go to the mall, I remember Saturday mornings, right? When I was telling you before about going to the Barnes and Noble, I would, get up late, because it's Saturday, I don't have work or anything like that, and goof around, in my boxers and a t-shirt, right? But then all of a sudden realize, okay, I want to go. So I had to take a shower. Spritz myself up even marginally, right? Before going to the Barnes and Noble and reading books all day. I had to do that. I couldn't not do that, right? Because I'm going to be out in public interacting with people. Now, I can be in my boxer shorts that I haven't changed in a week, and a t-shirt that can practically walk by itself, and no problem, because, it's online. I don't interact with anybody. It's just through the screen. And I think that leads us to decay, because we start to decay individually, and therefore we start to decay as a society. Does this make any sense?
Well, not only that, you're just so more easily manageable that way.
Yes, just so much more docile. Yeah. Because when you're in that rut, you're like, oh, it's only online shit, Like, for instance, I was realizing, I had to pay for like the new credit card. I was mentioning before, I got credit card fraud, right? And they canceled the card and they're going to send me a new one. But I have to pay for the FedEx of the card to get to me. And that's going to be, I don't know, $30, $40. And I'm like, okay, it's a cost that I'm willing to bear because of the convenience. And it's quite an excessive cost if you think about it.
Well, it must be because you're in Ukraine, because I've never been charged a FedEx for any stolen. In fact, they go out of their way to like give me the most priority FedEx credit card replacement when I've had fraud. And I've had it, a number of times. It's just common now. I don't know what the reason. Sorry, I'm interrupting your story, but it just sounds so weird. And I'm willing to bet our audience would wonder that.
Yeah, it's an American bank. It's not an American bank. Okay, and non-American banks don't have they don't prioritize their customers as much as American banks do.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, quite all right. But look, we've been going on an hour for this topic. Let's call it a podcast. What do you guys think? You who are listening to us so far, why don't you leave your thoughts in the description below. And yeah, this has been the Coach and Benway podcast. Thank you very much for listening to us, and we will see you next time. Take it easy.
Tell us the condition of your stores.
Yes, good. Tell us the condition of your stores. Yes. Later.